Okay, how's everybody? Awesome. Well, it's good to be here. My name is Keanu. I have a PhD in political science. My area is not Hawaiian culture. I leave that to those who know what they're doing. My area is political science, international relations, and public law. Yeah. I remember one time someone said, "Oh, you got your PhD in Hawaiian studies." I said, "What is that?" "Racial profiling." Because I'm Hawaiian, Hawaiian studies, you have a lot of Hawaiians in many different disciplines, yeah? Whether anthropology, history, Hawaiian studies, biology, the real sciences, medical doctors, lawyers. So my area focuses on the country, the Hawaiian Kingdom, okay? So when I speak of the Hawaiian Kingdom, I'm speaking about a country that my great-grandparents were born into, okay? I'm not talking about a sovereignty group or groups that are claiming to be something, right? I'm actually talking about a country where my great-grandfather was born in 1880. He grew up in a country called the Hawaiian Kingdom. He never traveled to the United States, right? So what I'm gonna do here is to explain about the country, the Hawaiian Kingdom, as it was then and how it continues to exist today, okay? This was the subject of my doctoral dissertation, also the subject of research and articles published. I'm not the only one that teaches this type of information at the university. There are many people up there who have also PhDs in other areas of political science, in geography, in history. And what's happening is we're starting to realize that what we were led to believe of what happened, in fact, that's not what happened, okay? It was a deliberate move to basically control the population. And by controlling the population, who, like my great-grandparents knew was illegal, you have to change the minds of my great-grandparents' children, which was my tutu's generation. So my tutu was born in 1910. In 1910, there was this program for patriotic exercises that was done as a policy by the Board of Education of the Territory of Hawaii. So some of you have this, and if you can share it, basically the theme of this program was to brainwash the children into believing they're American and that you speak English. The Hawaiian language was not a native language. The Hawaiian language was a national language, the language of the country. Hawaiian law was in both Hawaiian and English, okay? So that's how Hawaiian was understood back then. So what they did was when they embarked on this brainwashing, this is what is called denationalization. And Walter Reedy kind of mentioned denationalization when he was talking about when he went to school at Kamemel. And that the only thing that they were taught was how to be American and how to work in a system, right? Kamemel schools actually became the flagship for brainwashing because the insurgents were all trustees of the Kamemel schools in 1893. So they basically changed the curriculum into a type of labor type of work, yeah? Manual labor, okay? Actually, at the Kamemel schools, a program was adopted, and this program actually taught engineering through application of working with wood, working with metals. It was cutting edge at that time. When the overthrow occurred, they changed the curriculum and they basically made it into manual labor. And then they introduced the military and it became a military academy. So when Walter was there at Kamemel schools, that was 24/7 military. By the time I got there, in 1978 to 1982, it was just an ROTC program. And it was 2 years required and the next 2 years voluntary. Well, I ended up, because I played football, Sergeant Smith would have all the football players stay on in ROTC, not because we want to be in the military, it's so that we could beat anybody in tug of war during annual military day at Fort DeRussy. Now, what I didn't know was that my time at Kamehameha Schools in ROTC was going to lead me to actually attend a real military academy in New Mexico Military Institute. And I have to say that what I learned at New Mexico Military helps me and has assisted me in my approach on looking at problems, because we were being trained as officers, not enlisted. And I got my commission as a second lieutenant. One thing that we knew in the military, before you come up with a battle plan, you got to have good intel. You got to know what the other side is. You don't judge the other side, you look at that other side. You look at anything that happened that could assist you in how to engage that entity, right? Because the goal of the military is to overcome the opponent, right? And the reason why I was in the military wasn't because I wanted to be an American. I wanted to be a Hawaiian like all my uncles who was in the military. The problem was they all was drafted in Vietnam, but what I saw was my uncles in the military, and that's kind of got me going, yeah, I like being in the military too. And then become an officer as well. So when I was in the military, and I was in for 10 years, out of the 1st of the 487 Field Artillery, which is a Hawaii Army National Guard unit, that just got deployed. They're in Afghanistan right now. That's my old unit. For 10 years, as an officer, it was drilled into us in battle planning, get your intel. You gotta know the adversary. You don't try to judge the adversary. And when you try to understand the adversary, terminology is important, right? So if you're looking at what's there, and you may call an M60 machine gun something when it's actually an M60 tank, you kind of screwed up. You don't know how to really engage. But if you identify that's an M60 tank, okay, now I know how to engage it. And then you can apply strategy and tactics. Okay, so I'm just kind of building up the foundation as to why terminology is so important. Okay, I'm not promoting the military. It's just that when I was in the military, if you make a mistake, people die. See, that's when decisions become real, right? In civilian life, though, people make mistakes. They go, oh, well, tried. You make that same mistake in the military, in a battle, you may not be coming back. So that is kind of where I come from, right? So, terminology. Okay, then I'll get into the rest of the paperwork. We say today ceded lands, right? You hear that a lot, ceded lands. What is ceded lands? What is cede? Anybody? We'll make like a class. The first part was correct, not the second part. So cede is cession, C-E-S-S-I-O-N. And that is a transfer from one entity to another. See, something is going to be ceded, and it has to be voluntary. So the evidence of a cession in international relations is a treaty. A treaty is an agreement between countries, okay? So Alaska, let's use the example of Alaska. Alaska was ceded to the United States in 1867 by Russia. It was actually considered Russian territory at that time, okay? Once it was ceded, then Congress can now have jurisdiction over that territory. And in 1912, they created the Territorial Act. They created the Territory of Alaska, okay? And then in 1959, Congress changed the territory into the state of Alaska. And those are done through what is called congressional law, right? The Senate and the House pass a law, and the president signs it, okay? Now, here we today say ceded lands. So the first question we should be asking is not necessarily what is the outcome of the cession. Did cession actually take place? So I'm supposed to be looking for a treaty. That's the first thing I look at. I don't assume something was ceded, right? I remember a colonel once told me when I was a lieutenant, don't assume, because you make an ass out of you and me. It's called assume. Presume, right? That's what it's supposed to be. And if you don't know, sir, I'll get back to you with that information. You don't just make it up, right? Especially in the army, you make something up, again, people get hurt. So when we look at cession, it's like marriage. One country voluntarily joins with another country, whereby territory is going to be ceded, okay? If we look at our history, there is no treaty, none. There isn't. In fact, what we do have, we have treaties with the United States, but these treaties are the most favored nation treaties. These are friendship treaties that establish diplomatic relations, right? Hawaii also has a treaty with the United States in 1875, a commercial treaty. Trade. So certain goods from America can enter the Hawaiian Kingdom duty-free. You don't have to pay a tariff on it. And certain products of Hawaii could enter the American market duty-free. You don't pay an American tariff on it, right? You hear a lot of talk today about Donald Trump trying to assess more tariffs on China with the goods coming in from China. That's because of the lack of a treaty, right, or an agreement. Well, we had an agreement with the United States, a commercial treaty. So we have treaties with the United States. So the question then would be, why are we saying ceded lands? And when we say lands, it's not just Hawaii's sovereignty was transferred. Ceded lands apply to crowning government lands. Government lands, one in particular is an ahupua'a called Ka'ohe, right? That is toward the Mauka of Mauna Kea. Here, and that's government land, which is public lands, held under the authority of the Minister of the Interior. Here, this area here is not Ka'ohe, this is Humu'ula. This is the ahupua'a that is called Crown Lands. And Crown Lands was under the administration of the Crown Land Commissioners, okay? So that's where it was. So if anybody is going to cede these lands, you would need the consent of those parties, whether the Crown Land Commissioners or the Hawaiian Kingdom government, right? Just like how the state of Hawaii government claims to own Ka'ohe, and Hawaiian Homes claims to own Humu'ula, Crown Lands, right? You would need their consent. Well, their consent would be, if something was ceded lands, it would be in a treaty of cession, not a commercial treaty like 1875, not a friendship treaty like 1849, but a treaty of cession like the Russian treaty of 1867 transferring Alaska. What we have instead is a joint resolution. So a joint resolution, anybody know what is a joint resolution? What's a joint resolution? What's a joint resolution?
It sounds like when two parties come to an agreement.
Okay, so joint resolution. So a resolution is legislation, right? A joint resolution is where the House and the Senate agree on one particular issue. That's called a resolution. Now, another type of congressional legislation is called a bill, right? A bill that becomes an act, right? So a bill is introduced on one side, or it could be introduced on both. They debate it, and then they put it together, and if both agree with their votes, that bill then is referred to the president to sign into law to become an act, right? So when Alaska became a state in 1959, Congress did that by what is called the Statehood Act of Alaska, where they created that particular type of government. A joint resolution is another piece of legislation that the Senate and the House agree to, but a resolution is not an act. A resolution is actually a position statement, right? You can't enforce a resolution. A resolution is, today is Martin Luther King Day. That's a resolution. That's not an act because you can't enforce it. Yeah, if somebody doesn't recognize Martin Luther, who did I just say? Martin Luther King, Kalamai. If people don't recognize Martin Luther King Day, nothing's going to happen to them. They're not going to be fined, right? But if they pass a law that's an act, that this is Martin Luther's day, Martin Luther King's Day, and you violate that law, you can be fined. See, that's different. But a resolution is just saying, hey, Martin Luther King Day. It's a statement. Just like how any civic group or organization, they pass resolutions, yeah? It's a statement. That's all it is. So that's what Congress does. So what happened was in 1897, they tried to do it by a treaty with insurgents calling themselves the Republic of Hawaii, which the U.S. propped up. And that's what activated the Hui Aloha Aina and the Hui Kalai Aina for signature petitions. And that's where we find our kupuna, who may have signed the Hui Aloha Aina 21,000 signatures, but we still can't find the Hui Kalai Aina 17,000 signatures. It's somewhere, but they decided not to use it back then. They just wanted to go with the Hui Aloha Aina one, because the Hui Aloha Aina was just protesting annexation in any way, shape, or form. The Hui Kalai Aina 17,000 signature petition was saying not only protesting annexation, but restoring the Hawaiian monarchy. And because Congress hates monarchies, they decided to leave that out, a political decision, and run with the 21,000 Hui Aloha Aina Hawaiian Patriotic League petition. Now, they didn't just get it read into the record in September of 1897, because there was a treaty that was signed in June of 1897 during the summer. Representatives from the two organizations met with Queen Liliuokalani in Washington, D.C. in September. And they were told, you not only have to get it in, you got to go to all those senators that voiced an opinion that they're going to ratify that treaty. So you can see they're going to try to go the route of a treaty. Well, our kupuna, who were the leaders of these two organizations, went to all those senators and they got it chiseled down for them not to ratify it. And by March of 1898, the treaty's dead. So what you see there is an attempt to cede, right? A treaty of cession. That's an attempt. Spanish-American War breaks out. Okay? In April, the very next month, 1898, America has to fight the Spanish, not just in Puerto Rico and Cuba, but also Guam and the Philippines. Those are Spanish territories. So Francis Newlands, in 1898, introduces a joint resolution of annexation. A joint resolution. It is ultimately approved, and President McKinley signed it into law. Now, the problem with that joint resolution of annexation, it's not a treaty. It's an American law. The United States could no more pass a law annexing Hawaii, a foreign country, than they could pass a law annexing Russia. Whether by an act or a joint resolution, because both of them are legislation limited to U.S. territory. Does that make sense? Okay. So why is it today we say ceded lands then? We are assuming there's a treaty, right? And we just say it, ceded lands. Oha, ceded lands. Dr. Emmett Aluli even said, ceded lands. This is all as a result of brainwashing that has been so ingrained in us, we just say things without even knowing what we're saying. Here's another example of we saying things when it's wrong, but we still say it. Okay, so I share one story about my dad. This was about 20 years ago on one of the channels, A&E, about the giant squid, right? So I'm telling my dad that they're trying to find the giant squid, but they only find the legs that have been, I guess, floating in the ocean. And then they found out that the sperm whale, that's the one with the teeth, actually is the predator of this giant squid, where they go deep. So I'm explaining to my dad how they managed to put a camera on the dorsal fin of this sperm whale and he's going after the squid, and my father is looking at me. What are you talking about? Like, he's like, bro, what? And I'm like, no, it's on TV. They're trying to find the giant squid. He goes, what? I was like, am I talking Greek? And I'm looking at my dad, and I got it. Because my dad, even though he was raised in Kapahulu, the Saiohana, he would go out to Punaluu, to my Auntie Dana's house, and in Punaluu, what you do is you poke squid, right? Did you know that's not squid you poking, it's octopus. Right? Squid is another animal. In Hawaiian, that's muhe'e. Octopus is he'e. Octopus is in the reef, squid is in open ocean. So my dad was thinking, when I'm explaining this, that these scientists are putting on the camera on a dorsal fin of a sperm whale, and he's chasing an octopus in Punaluu in the reef. So it's a true story. So my dad calls my mom, Nanya, describe to me one squid. He goes, that's one octopus. Today we still say squid luau. If somebody was to put squid in that luau, you're gonna go, bro, what is that? Squid. Look like calamari. Because calamari is squid. Right? So we have to be careful how we say things, because somebody who knows the terminology of a squid are gonna look at you and go, what? Ceded lands. Ceded lands. Stop saying ceded lands until you show me the treaty. There's no treaty, so stop saying ceded lands. Because nothing was ceded. It's still government and crown lands. If anything, call it seized lands. Okay, that makes more sense. You didn't need a treaty for that. Yeah? That's just somebody coming in and controlling. But by controlling the land, that doesn't mean they own it. But if I can get everybody here to think and believe that this is a squid, I can get away with a lot of stuff. So we have to be careful what we say, right? So again, legislation, we just talked about, it's limited to United States territory. So the Hawaiian Kingdom had its own legislature. When the Hawaiian Kingdom passed laws, you had nobles and representatives passing laws in the Legislative Assembly. They knew they couldn't pass a law annexing America. They could only pass laws that applied to Hawaii. Well, in Congress in 1898, you had senators and representatives on the congressional record saying you cannot annex a foreign country by passing a law. You can't. How come we don't know that? Because of brainwashing. By the time this information is finished with my tutu, and she finishes 8th grade, and then she goes on to high school, she's at Sacred Hearts, it's already a given. This is America. By the time that information gets to my grandparents, my parents, my dad went St. Louis. He was born in 1939. It's already institutionalized. He thinks it's squid. By the time it got to me, no question, that's squid luau. Until I looked it up, I went, oh, that's octopus. So, can you see how important terminology is? Because terminology is important to inform decision making on how to address a problem. If you are trying to address the problem of an octopus, stop calling it a squid. Call it for what it is, and then you know how to poke it, right? You're gonna know how to use it. That's what I do it. So political science basically takes legal and political history and we apply it into the future. History is very important, and not just terminology. So when you tell a Hawaiian, look to the future, yeah, they look to the past. The word for future in the Hawaiian language is kawa mahope. Va or manava is time. Mahope is a directional. It means backwards. Mamua, imua, forward. Ihope, mahope, backwards. So when you tell a Hawaiian to make a decision, he doesn't look to the future, he looks to the past. And that past is anything that just happened from 1 second ago to a minute to an hour to 100 years to 500 years, however far back you let go. Because in that past is what we call the mo'olelo, right? The stories. It is the mo'olelo that we need to know so that we can capitalize on successes and learn from mistakes. Once we know the mo'olelo, and we will naturally, once we capitalize on successes, you're going to see your stuff moving into the future. It becomes a consequence of what you know, not because you made a decision. It's just a consequence. And see, that is when that decision that you made based upon our past is going to lead you into the future on addressing a particular problem. That is so military, but yet so Hawaiian. Yeah? It's so military, yet so Hawaiian. You guys ever saw the CD of Brother Is, Facing Future? You guys saw that? Brother Is, he's facing backwards with a big pahu, a big drum. And it says Facing Future. In fact, I knew Brother Is back then when he came out with that CD. That was Kawama Hope. He was, in order to look to the future, he was facing the past. A lot of people couldn't understand why you could only see his back. And it said it right there, Facing Future, right? So for us as a people, we need to know our past. And that past is the good, the bad, and the ugly. Don't judge it, understand it. Once you understand it, you capitalize on it. Because that is exactly what our kupuna would do. That is exactly what Kameme would do in battle strategies. They would always look to past battles, right? That's how it worked. Kameme didn't just come up with a strategy. No, that was based upon successes in battles from before, right? We have to understand it in that same way. So one of the terms that we need to understand in our situation, we need to know the difference between a state and a nation. Some people think it's the same, right? State, nation, same thing. Actually, no. A nation, the term nation, applies to a particular people who have a common language, culture, and history. Choctaw Nation, Navajo Nation, Scottish Nation, Welsh Nation, English Nation, right? That is the definition of a nation. For us, it's Kanaka. Kanaka Maoli, both pure or part, okay? Because Kanaka Maoli is actually pure blood. We were a nation under Kamemel, right? A particular nation that had its own culture, its own history, its own language, right? Then what is a state? A state is basically a country. A country that has a defined boundary, a centralized government, and people in it. Now, that country or that state could have different nations in it. An example of that would be the United Kingdom, Great Britain. In Great Britain, you got the English, yeah? You got the Northern Irish, you got the Welsh, and you got the Scottish. But Great Britain is the state called the UK. Does that make sense? So when we look at Hawaii, we were always a nation from as long as we were here, right? Well, that nation joined a state. So what is a state? Country. Country, right? Hawaii joined a state. Kameme the First joined a state. Anybody know what state Kameme joined voluntarily? Great Britain. He joined the British Empire. That was not a colony. Kameme joined as a protectorate. What that meant was Kameme and his chiefs still ran the nation, but Great Britain will take care of international affairs. That's what a protectorate is. If Hawaii was a colony of Great Britain, Kameme would have been removed and Great Britain would have sent a governor general to Hawaii to run this country, like a governor general was sent to Aotearoa, New Zealand, a governor general sent to Australia, and a governor sent to Canada. These were colonial possessions of the British Empire. We weren't colonial. We're actually a protectorate. We maintained control, right? And that relationship lasted from 1794 until 1843. Anybody know what day in 1843? November 28th, Independence Day, La Kuoko'a. That is when Great Britain recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom, and it specifically states in the proclamation, recognizes the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state. We basically separated from Great Britain without fighting, like how the United States separated from Great Britain, but they fought. They had a revolution. We didn't fight. We actually played politics. And I gotta say, Timoteo Ha'alilio and William Richards and Sir George Simpson, oh, they was pretty akamai playing the game, right? So once Hawaii became an independent state, that term independence is different. Anybody know what independent means? Because you hear that today, it's like squid, right? Everybody says independence. Hey, we like our independence. What is independence? Before you want your independence, define independence. Anybody, what is the definition of independent?
Freedom to rule yourselves.
To a certain degree, good.
Self-sustaining.
How's about self-governing? Okay, so self-governing, controlling your own destiny, as opposed to, in international terms, non-self-governing. So non-self-governing applies to colonies. And in order for a colony, which is non-self-governing, because they're being controlled by the main colonizer through their laws, they can become decolonized and choose to be a state, an independent state. So India didn't move from a British protectorate to an independent state in the 1940s with Gandhi. They moved from a British colony into an independent state. That's different than Hawaii. We were still a nation in control, and we were self-governing. When Queen Victoria recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom as being independent, that's a political term. Basically what that means is, when Great Britain says the Hawaiian Kingdom is independent and we recognize it, it's saying that only Hawaiian Kingdom law applies over that territory. Hawaiian Kingdom law, not British law. Prior to 1843, British law did apply. That's why we have the Union Jack on that flag, right? That's part of our history. After 1843, no more British law, Hawaiian Kingdom law. And any British subject in the Hawaiian Kingdom cannot call Great Britain for help. They got to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law. And if they want to participate in changing Hawaiian Kingdom law, they can get naturalized, become a Hawaiian subject, 5 years residency, and give your oath of allegiance to our kingdom, which some of them did, like Robert Wiley. He was a Scotchman, but British, right? So he had Hawaiian nationality, and he was the one that was able to secure additional treaties of other countries, like Switzerland, to recognize Hawaii as an independent state. So when Swiss come to Hawaii, they're subject to Hawaiian Kingdom law. And when Hawaiian subjects travel to Switzerland or to France, they're subject to French law, Swiss law. That's what independent means. But you can be a state and not be independent, okay? An example of that would be Japan. Japan, China, Siam, which is Thailand, they were not independent states, meaning other countries, independent states, did not recognize their independence. Okay, so we can continue. How are you guys so far? Am I making sense? Have I clearly distinguished between a squid and an octopus? Okay. So between what is ceded and what is it? Yeah. Okay. So when we talk about independence, some people say, hey, we got to push for independence. Well, Great Britain already recognized their independence, right? But remember, I stated that not all states are independent, meaning countries. So Japan, Siam, which is Thailand, China, they actually, their independence was not recognized. What that meant was that anybody who gets into trouble, like if an American citizen gets into trouble in Japan, commits a crime, he cannot be prosecuted under Japanese law. He could only be prosecuted under American law by the American consulate in Tokyo. That's called consular jurisdiction. What you call that is an unfair treaty, right? In China, you get into trouble in China, let's say you French, you won't be prosecuted under Chinese law, you'll be prosecuted under French law that looks similar to what law you violated in China. Did you know the Hawaiian Kingdom had that same provision, that same right, where any Hawaiian subject in Japan in 1880 who commits a crime, they only can be prosecuted under Hawaiian Kingdom law by the Hawaiian consulate in Tokyo. So can you see what independence means? So the Meiji Emperor was trying to get Japan recognized as being independent. That was his major push. So when King Kalakaua in 1881 was traveling the world in Japan, he had a meeting with the Meiji Emperor. And the Meiji Emperor asked King Kalakaua, would you be one of the first powers to recognize Japan's full independence? Can you understand now how they're using independence? It's not physical, it's the legal system. Another word for independence is called sovereignty. Yeah? Independence is sovereignty, supreme authority over your territory. Well, in Japan, they didn't have supreme authority over foreigners because their independence wasn't recognized. So King Kalakaua said, oh, we'll look into it, we should. But when he came home, he got caught in the Bayonet Constitution and civil unrest. Well, did you know Queen Liliuokalani, through the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Samuel Parker Ranch, he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, they sent a dispatch to Irving, the Hawaiian ambassador in Japan, a diplomatic note stating that the Hawaiian government recognizes Japan's full independence and rescinds consular jurisdiction. So any Hawaiian subject getting into trouble in Japan after 1893 will be subject to Japanese law. Great Britain followed after in 1894. Did you know in the history books, they say Great Britain was the first to recognize Japan independence. There's no mention of Hawaii, when in fact Hawaii was the first. Interesting, huh? The history was changed, the narrative. So whenever you look at our situation in Hawaii, the way it's been played out because of denationalization, they make it that we're just a nation of native people that wish to become independent. And that's called the sovereignty movement, moving towards sovereignty, meaning it's not here yet. They're trying to get it. Or the independence movement. But we already got it, right? So what are we trying to get? Well, the reason why we're trying to get something we already have, because we're led to believe something that's not true. So every time we make decisions based upon calling this a squid, we keep walking down the path of frustration. But once you apply what those rules existed back then and the right terms, that changes everything. So the question then is, knowing the difference between a state and a nation, so we were a nation that became the state. Just like Tongans. Tongans were a nation that became the state of Tonga, right? Samoans, same thing, right? So we've been led to believe that we're just a native people, a nation of people, where we have to build a nation where we could choose to be an independent state. You don't choose something you already have. So first we need to ask, where'd it go if we're trying to get it back? Because I may be assuming we don't have it, when in fact, we might actually still have it. So then we get into what happened in 1893. So, laws that are established by countries is a reflection of their independence and their sovereignty, which only applies to their territory because of independence. That's why American law doesn't apply in Canada, and Canadian law doesn't apply in America, because both countries are independent states. They have their own legal system. The Hawaiian Kingdom was an independent state in 1893. Now what you also have to do, you gotta be careful about another term. The difference between what is a state, which is the country, right? State is country, and people in the country are not just Kanaka. You got Haulis that are Hawaiian, because the word Hawaiian, under Hawaiian Kingdom law, and the word Hawaiian was actually, it was actually created, which is an English word. Hawaiian was actually created by the chiefs in 1827. So here's the history behind the word Hawaiian, okay? The chiefs wanted to change the name from Sandwich Islands to Hawaiian Islands. So sandwich was an earl in Great Britain who was funding Captain Cook's travels. Yeah, when he's mapping the ocean, trying to find the Northwest Passage, right? So he named this place the Sandwich Islands, okay? We were actually known up until 1827 as the Kingdom of the Sandwich Islands, okay? The chief said, we don't know this guy Sandwich. Never met him. I didn't even know they knew at that time what a sandwich was, let alone who is Sandwich. So they came up with this decision to change the name Sandwich Islands to Hawaiian Islands. They came up with the word Hawaiian. Now, when you take that name Hawaiian Islands and you translate it into the native language, it's Ko Hawaii Pai Aina. That's the translation for Hawaiian Islands. Ko Hawaii Pai Aina is important, again, terminology, because Hawaii is a geographical location like Great Britain is a geographical location. Hawaii is not a people. Hawaii is an island. Kamehameha was the king of the kingdom of Hawaii. Kahikili was the king of the kingdom of Maui. Ka'eo was the king of Kauai and Niihau. These were called the leeward kingdoms, Maui and Kauai, which always fought against the kingdom of Hawaii. Constant fighting, right? Well, Kamehameha consolidated these kingdoms. Kamehameha, the kingdom of Hawaii, conquered. Na'iaupuni. He didn't negotiate with them. He didn't say, hey, you like join? No, that was war. Conquest. It's not international law. This is Hawaii rules, or Kanaka rules, right? So Kamehameha would call himself the king of the Sandwich Islands, meaning a consolidation of three kingdoms. When they changed it to Hawaiian Islands, the name Ko Hawaii Pai Aina is very illuminating, because when you break it down, the word ko is ownership. Somebody owns something, yeah? So if I say that this is my paper, this is ko Keanu Pa'a, ko Keanu Pepa, Keanu's paper. So when I say ko Hawaii Pai Aina, that means Hawaii owns something. What do they own? Pai Aina. That's not Pepa. Pai Aina are islands. So Ko Hawaii Pai Aina literally means the islands that belong to Hawaii, the kingdom of Hawaii. Kamehameha, not Kahikili, not Ka'eo. So you see where the word Hawaiian comes from? It's a geographical location. So when you call nationals of the country in the Hawaiian kingdom, so my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, their nationality, again, another term, we mess up. Somebody says to somebody, hey brother, what's your nationality? Oh, Hawaiian, Chinese, French, Caucasian. It's like the United Nations. I say, brother, that's not your nationality, that's your ethnicity. Right? Remember, squid, octopus. Nationality is what country you're from. It's called citizenship. And nationalities always refer not to a particular people or nation, but a geographical location. So Chinese, because of China. But you also have a nation of people in China called Mandarin. That's ethnic. Chinese is nationality. Make sense? So when you say Hawaiian, that's a nationality. That is a short term for the word Hawaiian subject. Like British, which refers to Britain, the island, right? A British subject, British is a short term for British subject. You say British, but you can be black and be British. Sidney Poitier used to be British before he became American, but he's still black, right? So you cannot change your ethnicity, but you can change your nationality. Chad Rowan, Akebono, sumo wrestler. He's Kanaka, right? But he's now Japanese. He doesn't look Japanese, but he's a Japanese citizen. So you see the terms there? We have to be careful how we use it, because when you say somebody Hawaiian, hey, Hawaiian. One Haole go, hey, I'm Hawaiian. Really? But we tend to think through American law passed by Congress called the Hawaiian Homes Act, which is an American law, 50% blood quantum. They created the definition of native Hawaiian with the lowercase as blood quantum. That is not Hawaiian. And it was our chiefs in 1827 that made up the word Hawaiian, which is English. So here's how it's used back then in the Kingdom era. Again, terminology. So that's what this class is about, terminology. Bernice Bowahi, when she formed the Kamehameha Schools, in her will, Article 13, says financial aid will be given to those Hawaiians of Aboriginal blood, pure or part. That means you got Hawaiians, not Aboriginal, pure or part. Pure is Kanaka Maoli, part is Hapa. You're not Hapa Haole, you're actually Hapa Kanaka. That's how it was perceived, right? So you can be a Hawaiian going to Kamehameha, and if you're not Aboriginal, meaning native, you don't get financial assistance. And that's still there in the record, right? So then we get into the term Indigenous and Aboriginal, right? Because you hear that term used a lot, like ceded lands. We're Indigenous people. Okay, well, Indigenous, is Indigenous the same as Aboriginal? What do you guys do first before even answering that question? Look it up. It's called a dictionary, right? We're not asking opinions on words because these words existed before we have an opinion. So we do what we do up at UH. Look it up. So when you look up the word Aboriginal, first of all, Aboriginal cannot be the same as Indigenous by the mere fact that they're two different words, right? Okay. So what is Aboriginal? Some people might think, oh, Aborigines in Australia. But what's the definition of Aboriginal? Not who is an Aborigine. Anybody know what is the definition of Aboriginal? What? People from that place? Nope. Nope. That's actually Indigenous. Indigenous, by definition, is originating in a particular region. That's why Indigenous was used to apply to plants and animals. This animal is indigenous to this particular area in the Galapagos, right? You wouldn't call humans indigenous because you would have to say then, where are humans from? Where did we originate from as humans? Well, from our history, yes, but scientifically, Africa. That's what I'm saying. We had a hollow over there, but see, exactly. So we all originated from Africa, right? That's the DNA. Kalekoa Kaeo, he does that the best. He says Jesus is actually black, and he proves it. He's not white, right? The more you go into the Middle East, the closer you get into Africa. So who are us? Well, that's where the word Aboriginal comes from. The term Aboriginal is first to arrive in a region. It's called migration. See, we had Maui Loa. We came to Hawaii. We did not originate here. We got here on 300 AD, right? That's in our Mo'olelo. We came from Kahiki, okay? Some foreign place. Not necessarily Tahiti, right? It's a foreign place. They say Pele came from Kahiki. So we're not from here, so we cannot call ourselves indigenous. Can you see why Bernice Pauahi used in her will Hawaiians of Aboriginal blood, first to arrive, whether pure, Kanaka Maoli, or part, Hapa? So where is indigenous people coming from? Why would they call people indigenous? That word is a political term that was created in the 1980s at the United Nations Economic and Social Committee called the Working Group on Indigenous Peoples, or Indigenous Populations, right? And that working group was set up to specifically address the marginalization and the racism and the subjugation of nations that aren't states but found themselves in a state, whether by colonial conquest, whether by so-called discovery, right? So this working group made up of Aboriginals, natives, from the different parts of the world, because this is United Nations, they had to come up with a definition of indigenous people, because it never existed before 1980s. So what they came up with was indigenous people are tribal people within a state. So Choctaw, Navajo, Cherokee, Maori, right? Aborigines in Australia, okay? In Europe, there are indigenous people there, right? In the Scandinavian countries, I forgot the name of those indigenous people. Sami, yes. Okay, you also have indigenous in Japan, the Ainu. Yeah. So those are indigenous people that are nations of people that exist within a state. And the UN was investigating the control that these states were having over them, which were taking away their lands, all that stuff, okay? So those are indigenous people. And the definition of indigenous people, which is not in question, are tribal people, which are nations that are not states but exist within states that they didn't create, which created indigenous politics, right? For Hawaii, the only way we can claim to be indigenous people, according to that definition from the 1980s, is we have to say we're not a state, but we exist as a nation within the United States. See, now we walk right into the very beast we're trying to get out of. We're reinforcing our own problem by calling it a squid, when we should be calling it an octopus, and we're not even supposed to be there because we're not in there, because nothing was ceded. And as a people, you can say, Kamehameha was an indigenous people. Our people were indigenous before they joined the British Empire, joined that state, and then we became a state, but now we're Aboriginal. Make sense? You don't hear Samoans in Samoa calling themselves indigenous people because they're already a state, right? You don't hear Tongans calling themselves indigenous people because they're already a state. So every time we say indigenous people, we're unknowingly saying we're Americans and we're trying to fight for our independence. You see how that's how you get caught. When in fact, what happened to our independence? So now we get into our independence and what happened to it in 1893. Any questions so far with what I'm covering so far? You guys all good? Am I making sense? Am I making too much sense? Getting kind of scary, huh? Yeah. Now you gotta go home and tell your dad, hey daddy, it's not squid luau. Or auntie, we're not indigenous people. We're Hawaiian subjects. With all due respect to indigenous people, this is not saying it in a disrespectful way. It's just saying we're not indigenous people, but we can definitely support the rights of indigenous people. You guys see where that's coming from? This is not an attitude issue. This is called calling a spade and how we fix our problem. Because if we think we are indigenous people, then we're limited to the process of what they call self-determination to choose what we want when in fact we already got it. The question is, did we lose it? Did America get it? Well, obviously there's no treaty. So they didn't get it. So that means the Hawaiian Kingdom is still independent. Hawaiian Kingdom law still applies. And Ka'ohe doesn't belong to the state of Hawaii, it belongs to the Hawaiian Kingdom government that was overthrown in 1893. So now we're getting into the difference between what is a government and what is a state. A state is, what is a state again? A country. A government is not a country. A government is a body politic that exercises the authority and sovereignty of the country. Whether that government is monarchy, republic, totalitarian, communist, whatever you call it, every government is different, but every government is not a country. And the reason why that's important, this is something that I just knew when I was in the Army, 1990, I was at Fort Sill during the first Gulf War when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And the Iraqis overthrew the Kuwaiti government. We knew Kuwait still existed. The country still existed even though the government was overthrown. And international law required Saddam Hussein to administer Kuwaiti law during his occupation until they get a treaty of cession, right? Saddam Hussein did, they annexed Kuwait. They said in Baghdad, we pass a law annexing Kuwait. But remember, Kuwait is still an independent country. It's still a country, and our job in the military at that time was to expel the Iraqis out of the country so that the government can come back in and the occupation ends. But there was no question as to whether or not Kuwait ceased to exist. It exists, even though the government was overthrown. And then when the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, they overthrew Saddam Hussein's government. Well, did you know Iraq still existed after that? And the United States followed the law of occupation. They administered Iraqi law. They never had a treaty. America did not administer American law passed by Congress in Baghdad. They were actually administering Iraqi law. Why? Because Iraq was still independent. It was never transferred. Only Iraqi law applied. Did you know they did the same thing after World War II? The Japanese government was overthrown. Treaty of Surrender proved it. 1945 on the USS Missouri in Japan. Right? The Missouri is in Pearl Harbor now. They signed the treaty, government overthrown, give control to the Allied forces. General MacArthur was the military governor that ensured he administered Japanese law. And Japan was occupied from 1945 to 1952. 1952, a treaty of peace was signed where the occupation came to an end. In that treaty of peace, Japan did not give away its country. One of the territories that it released was Korea. Formosa, which is Taiwan. That was actually acquired by the Japanese when the Japanese fought against China. China ceded Taiwan to Japan. 1952 Treaty of Peace, Japan released any title or claim over Taiwan. So there was a treaty there, right? What should have happened in Hawaii we need to understand what was done. What was overthrown on January 17th, 1893? Was it the government or the country?
Government.
Was the government. Same thing like Saddam Hussein with Kuwait, same thing like the United States with Iraq. So if you overthrew the government, you didn't acquire the country. You need a treaty, right? Well, how do you get a treaty without the government? Guess what? Our country's protected by the fact that you overthrew our government. Because you didn't get it, because you can't get it, because who's signing a treaty? So they try to get a manufactured government to do it, called the Republic of Hawaii, previously called the Provisional Government. And our people killed that treaty because our people were politically astute on how American law operates, and they needed 2/3 of the Senate to ratify this so-called treaty with insurgents that they propped up, and they killed it. Because of us, they killed it, not because of them in doing the right thing. So when they passed the law, a joint resolution of annexation, did they acquire the country? No, they didn't. All they did was brainwash the people in the country to believe everything was ceded and you're now American, when in fact, it's not true. Those are the facts. And that's how it works, right? Any questions so far? You guys good? So number one, are we indigenous people? No. Do we support indigenous rights? Absolutely, right? Are we colonized? Okay, not a term. We found another squid in there. Let's clarify this octopus. Okay, colonization. Colonization. First of all, remember the word independence, where one country, right, has independent authority over its territory to the exclusion of other countries who are independent that have authority over their territory, meaning their laws are limited to their own territory. They don't apply outside of their territory. The only thing that applies outside is if they enter into a treaty, because a treaty is an agreement between countries, and the word international law, literally inter means between. The word international law is the law between nations. not the law within nations. The law within nations are called national laws or domestic law, not international law. So if you want to colonize a territory, you're going to run into a problem if that territory you want to colonize is already independent and you recognize that independence. So I'll give you an example. Could the United States colonize Great Britain? It cannot. Why? Because Japan's still independent. See, a colonial possession is where the territorial government of the state will pass laws that apply in that territory. That's what the British colonies, which later became independent states, United States of America, they were crown colonies. British law passed in Parliament was applied there, as well as them making their own laws. They were a British possession, right? Could Great Britain in 1770 apply its laws in France?
No,
Why?
because France was recognized as an independent state.
Because it's independent. Were the colonies independent when British law was applied over the colonies in America? No, they're fighting for their independence. They went into a revolution. They fought for 7 years, right? They were fighting against the imposition of British law. They want to be independent. They want to make their own law, right? So in order to colonize territory, you can't be an independent state because it defies independence. Make sense? So you can only colonize a non-state territory, like Australia was colonized, but later became an independent state through decolonization. So you can only colonize territories that are not states, that are independent, period. That's how it works. But you can still be in another country called a state. A state can still come in another country and do something like this. That's not colonization. This is called denationalization. They are obliterating the national consciousness of the people of an occupied state. That's exactly what Germany was doing in Luxembourg during World War II. When they took over the schools, they're treating the Luxembourger children as if they're German. But it didn't last, because within 5 years, 1945, war ends. In Hawaii, this started in 1906. It still continues today. And here's a picture of an article that was put in an article in Harper's Weekly magazine that went to visit 3 schools in Hawaii when denationalization was taking place. They visited Ka'iolani Public School, Kahumanu Public School, grades 1 through 8, and Honolulu High School, before the name was changed to President William McKinley High School, part of the brainwashing. So what they do is they have this picture here on the last page. At the command of the principal, 714 school children are ordered to attention and they start marching. Remember, this is grades 1 through 8. And at the command of the principal, they line up in front of the flag and they salute. How does that salute? Kind of looks like a Nazi salute, huh? This is actually a civilian salute. Yeah, it's actually, they call it a Bethlehem salute, right? And then Mussolini and Hitler hijacked it. So then children in America went like this, where they used to go like that. Nothing wrong with the salute. That's a civilian salute. But the problem is, these are not American citizens. These are Hawaiian subjects in an occupied territory. So the caption under this, it says, at the command of the principal, they all yelled in unison, "We give our heads and our hearts to God and our country. One country, one language, one flag." This scene shows a salute to the American flag, which flies on the grounds of the Ka'iolani Public School, which has many Japanese pupils. The drill is constantly held as a means of inculcating patriotism in the hearts of the children. Inculcating. Inculcating, by definition, is brainwashing through repetition. That's what it means when you look it up. Inculcate. This is my Tutu's generation. Brainwashing. Again, by the time it got to my dad, it's already institutionalized. By the time it got to me at Kamehameha, out of sight, out of mind, I didn't know anything. Yeah? And then we hear this false narrative where we start to react to our situation when we really didn't know the terminology, and we start to look at things with what we're seeing because we didn't know otherwise. So when we see indigenous people, we look like, hey, that's like us. Looks similar, we must be indigenous. When in fact we're not, we're Aboriginal and we're nationals of an occupied state. If we say we're indigenous, we're reinforcing the very problem we're trying to get out of, because we're saying we're indigenous people within the United States. So when people travel to the United Nations, the permanent form of indigenous rights, that only applies to indigenous people within the states that are members of the UN. And to be an independent state, remember we're still independent, right? To be an independent state, you don't have to be a member of the UN. Did you know Switzerland didn't join the UN until 2002? So the UN is just an organization of independent states to address problems and to have dialogue. That's all it is. So do we as a country have to be a member of the UN? No, because we're not, because the UN wasn't around in 1893. If it was, we probably would have joined it, because the Hawaiian Kingdom was also a member of the forerunner of the United Nations called the Universal Postal Union. That was an organization of independent states as well. So Hawaii would have probably joined the UN. But what happened in 1893? Our government was overthrown. So if our government is overthrown, our country is silent. Nobody can hear it. But did it go anywhere? No, it just turned into a cocoon. And it's been like that for over 100 years. And right now, through awareness and education, this cocoon has started to crack open. And what's coming out of this is the butterfly from 1893. It never left. It was still protected. But we have to start using the right terms and not say, oh, nobody's listening. Well, I can tell you nobody's listening because you keep calling an octopus what squid. So we have to be mindful of the terminology. You cannot say we were colonized, then you admit the United States has its laws over us. And we have to break away to become independent so we have our own laws. Hey, we already got them. What we have is, since 1893, a violation of international law. But only now we're understanding the violations because we're using the right terms. So now we have PhDs coming up with this stuff. Now we're talking the language that other countries talk, because we don't only just have a treaty with America, we got treaties with Italy, Germany, Japan. Did you know they're finding out that those treaties still exist? In fact, Nalani Balutsky was here earlier talking. Did she share with you that they just came back from a trip to Europe? They're retracing our kupuna of the past in Europe, because we had a study, we had an education abroad program, study abroad. So Hawaiian subjects, young Hawaiian subjects, men and women, were sent off to be educated. Miley Boyd was sent to University of Torino to learn sculpture. How's that? Pretty cool. Robert Wilcox, yeah, Booth, Wilcox, Willie Koki. They went to the Italian Military Academy. Robert Wilcox was trained as an officer in the field artillery. We got something in common, because field artillery is king of battle. They're the ones coming up with the battle plan. I actually went to go visit that academy a couple years ago, 2016. I actually saw paperwork of Willie Koki. Amazing, amazing. And I started to talk to the commandant and the other officers. How's the training? Because that's West Point of Italy today. We were talking the field artillery language. And I said, Willie Koki is a field artillery officer. And they didn't realize that Hawaii had cadets there in the 1800s. But other countries in Europe would send their best men to that academy to be commissioned as an officer and then come back to their country. Here's the Hawaiian Kingdom playing that. Nalani and them are taking students from UH to retrace that. Did you know they also visited the military academy in Naples, where The young man, last name Boyd, attended, and a few others. That's like the high school version of military academy, right? And they were received by Naples Military Academy as a Hawaiian delegation. And they were talking to them, this delegation of young men and women from UH, with the understanding they're coming from another country, not America, the Hawaiian Kingdom. Because they too are getting educated on its relationship with Hawaii. So we're not only here, Makaala, right, and being made aware, other countries are being made aware, right? In fact, did she share with you when they visited where the consulate was, the Hawaiian consulate? Did she share that with you? My nephew was up there with them, Na'i. What happened was, they went to go find where the Hawaiian consulate was, and they had the address in Naples, right? But the building got destroyed in World War II, yeah, the bombing. Well, in its place was a shop. And the shop owner, they shared the story with the shop owner that this is where the Hawaiian consulate was. The shop owner was tripping. He's like, really? He said, I'm going to be flying the Hawaiian flag. So he actually flies the Hawaiian flag at his shop, and that becomes the topic of discussion. Did you know this was the Hawaiian Kingdom Consulate? You know, so this awakening, yeah, we are starting to learn, and we're now starting to converse and have constructive dialogue. This is not about blaming anybody. It's called, maybe I should reassess what I thought I knew, right? Right? So this is just some of the terminology. Let me show you how that terminology worked out. This is a handout of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. There was a case that was held up there between 1999 and 2001. Larson versus the Hawaiian Kingdom. Okay. Now this is important because you first have to understand, first of all, what is the Permanent Court of Arbitration? Remember the term. The Permanent Court of Arbitration was formed in 1899, right? The Hague Conventions. This was the beginning of codifying the laws of war. The Permanent Court was created for countries to resolve their disputes so they don't go to war. If you go to war, then you use the other Hague Conventions, which regulates the war, which one of them is, if you overthrow the government in war, you must administer the laws of the occupied state, not your own. That's in the treaty, Article 43. It's existed in 1893. It's just a codification of recognized laws. So the Permanent Court of Arbitration, in order for it to resolve disputes, what they do is they form tribunals to resolve a dispute. In order to have jurisdiction, called institutional jurisdiction, because what they do is they create tribunals with experts in a particular area of the dispute. You don't have standing tribunals waiting to hear a case. They come in, countries come in, and they say, we have a dispute on a treaty dealing with boundaries. So they bring in experts to form the tribunal, the arbitrational tribunal. But before they can do that, they gotta verify that one of the countries is a state. Remember, what is a state? Country. They gotta verify that it's an existing country, because if it's not a state, it's not international. They cannot take up an issue of a nation of people who have been who are under colonization and resolve a dispute, because if they do that, they'll be violating the country where that colony is in. So that entity, indigenous people, that nation, would not be able to have access to the Permanent Court of Arbitration. They got to be a state. United States resolve disputes there. You got to be state. Latest one, you guys heard of the South China Sea case? China's building up military bases in on islands in the South China Sea. That's a dispute between Philippines and the United States at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Well, they actually verified Hawaii to be a state. So they state here the name of the claimant, Lance Larson. You guys have this copy. It says private entity. Name of the respondent, the defendant, Hawaiian Kingdom. It says state. If Hawaii was a part of the United States, this court would not have accepted the case. If we were still fighting for our independence like the British colonists were doing against Great Britain, took them 7 years to fight, they would not be able to enter the Permanent Court of Arbitration. It was only after the revolution where Great Britain recognized them as independent states, 13 of them, could they now have access to the Permanent Court of Arbitration. But nobody understood this because we were still talking squid. We're still talking squid. So when I came home from The Hague, because I represented the Hawaiian Kingdom up there, I tried to explain this to people, and they telling me, no, that's not what happened. I'm like, really? Yeah, I read it. Wait. I was there. And when you read something, it's also called, are you comprehending what you're reading? And if you still think it's a squid, then you got the main term wrong to begin with, so I don't know what you're reading. We had to come back home in 2001 to begin re-education. That is when I entered the University of Hawaii Political Science Department to address this denationalization and go head on in the Political Science Department and change the narrative in all disciplines at the university. And I can tell you, I was not really liked. Because wouldn't you feel bad that you just found out you've been calling one octopus one squid? Kind of like make air. So what I try to tell people, it's okay. So I got to find a way that it's okay to make a mistake, right? So I would tell people, I'm never wrong. I tell my wife, I'm never wrong. No, I'm serious, I'm never wrong. I'm just temporarily off track. See, when you're temporarily off track, then you can get back on track. When you say you're wrong, it's so definitive. Oh, beef already. You know, you like throw blows. Hey, temporarily off track. Get back on track, we're all good. Okay, from squid to octopus. Okay, keep walking. So what's happening now is you're seeing a lot of our people, a new generation of educated people, not just Kanaka. They're taking our classes, and it's just not me. There's a lot of people teaching this at the university. But careful use of the terms, because there's no excuse now. And especially dealing with a situation like this, these terms come into play. Because now, this is not about culture. Culture is involved, but this is about, number one, TMT has no right up there because the state of Hawaii has no title. Why? No treaty. Where's the consent? That lease is invalid. That is a term a businessman can understand. But I came to that conclusion because of understanding and knowing our history. So when I say no treaty, I can prove it. When I say this is not the United States, I can prove it. When I say we're not indigenous people, I can prove it. But we still support indigenous rights. So people gotta stop playing this game or playing their game and actually use it against them. Right? No treaty. Period. Tamara Polton, the councilwoman from Maui County Council, that's what she wrote to President Lasslin. The focus here is UH, not IGE, not the DLNR. It's UH that entered into a entered into a lease with TMT called a sublease. UH got its lease from the State of Hawaii Board of Land and Natural Resources in 1968. What our people knew in 1968 is not what we know now. See, now we know no treaty. Back then, we said ceded lands. So naturally, okay, a lease would appear to be valid. Now, no way. Now we got research that can prove it. This is not activism. It's just called, show me the treaty. No treaty. Ka'ohe still belongs to the Hawaiian Kingdom government. Where's the Hawaiian Kingdom government? Well, you overthrew it. You never transferred a title. Did you know the Apology Resolution? 1993, another one. Another term. First of all, what is the Apology Resolution passed by the U.S. Congress in 1993? It was a joint resolution. It wasn't an act, it was a joint resolution. What is the Apology Resolution? What is a resolution? A statement. It's a statement. It's not an act, right? But it is a legislation enacted by Congress. Can Congress pass laws over Hawaii? No, because no treaty, remember? So the Statehood Act is an American law that was passed by Congress. It can't apply here without a treaty first. Remember with Alaska? There was a treaty in 1867. transferring Alaska under the jurisdiction of Congress. 1912, Congress created the territory of Alaska, and then in 1959, Congress changed the territory into a state. In Hawaii, you had a joint resolution of annexation, which didn't annex anything. Hawaii is not part of the United States. And then in 1900, they passed the Organic Act, saying Hawaii is the territory of Hawaii, okay, but you still didn't have a treaty. And then in 1959, they changed the name from the territory to the state. No treaty. That first step never happened like Alaska happened. So the state of Alaska, oh, that's legal. State of Hawaii is not, because no treaty. Can you see how important the treaty is? So here's the apology resolution. Again, another American piece of legislation, right? In there, they use the word indigenous people. They say Native Hawaiians are the indigenous people of the United States. It's right there, it says it. Then it says Native Hawaiians have a right to self-determination to choose what they want. Yeah, but we already have it. You see how it's called, see the Howleys say, throw the red herring. Red herring is like the red fish. The Hawaiians, they throw the hapule. Show the hapule. So instead of looking at me, look over there. It's called deflection. Keep talking that. What happens is, if you engage that, you're doing exactly what you're not supposed to be doing, is to reinforce the very problem you're trying to get out of. Because now you're arguing about the squid. And it's not a squid. It's octopus. So the apology resolution has actually been used, the terms in it, by a lot of people in the sovereignty movement as sound bites. We have a right to self-determination. Well, what is self-determination? Self-determination is to choose whether or not you want to become an independent state. Well, we exercised self-determination in 1843. We became an independent state. You don't become an independent state again. It's like me with my PhD, I already got it. I don't have to get everybody to recognize it. I just got to get my diploma, say I got them. So what do I need to show that we're independent? What document? The Anglo-French Proclamation of November 28, 1843. That's what you guys should be showing. That shows that we're an independent state. So that apology resolution actually has been used to reinforce the confusion. We have to go before the confusion. So that's why we've been explaining a football game using baseball rules. That's simple. Same facts. Once you apply football rules called terminology, now you know, stop calling the quarterback when pitcher. And stop calling the football a baseball. And you're angry because it's oblong, so you blame the Howleys for it. Yeah? That's the number one. We blame everybody. Blame the missionaries. Blame the Howley. Hey, Hawaii, you Christian. Hey, Hawaii, you part Howley. Brother, you in walking contradiction. Because you know why I can say that? That's what I used to think. When I was taking class at the university, I was a walking contradiction. You know, I'm Reeves Ohana. My family is Reeves. Keanu Reeves, the movie actor. That's my cousin. Our great-grandfather came from Sparta, Tennessee, married our tutu, Rose, Hawaiian, and that's when you got this family. You know, so it's not blaming him, but I can blame specific Howleys as well as specific Kanaka for 1893. This was not a native issue. Yeah, Lauren Thurston, traitor. Not his family, him. My father commits a crime, don't blame me. Yeah, unless stolen property I inherited, okay, now you can deal with that. Did you know Kanaka were also involved in the takeover? Reverend Kauhane, Albert Mauna Kea, the so-called illegitimate son of Kamehameha III, he was actually part of the Republic of Hawaii. So we have to be careful not to play this native card. No, it's called allegiance and law. You got traitors and you have royalists. And royalists, when you look in the Kingdom era, included Chinese, included Greeks. Willie Kauai, so professor, he's up at UH. He has a PhD in political science. I sat on his doctoral committee. He covered Hawaiian nationality. Oh, amazing, amazing research. You got popolos that are Hawaiian. You know, so we have to kind of rethink how we've been using the terms. And it just takes time. So, when you get a chance, there are 3 articles that was published by the National Education Association. And I'll bring it to a close, this presentation. And I want to thank you folks for this undivided attention. Okay? You guys was understanding what I said though. And not just going, because I'm watching everything. But I didn't see any of you going, you know, because when I see the eyes going like that, I go, oh, gotta slow down, bust out one choke. Oh, overkill, take it easy. Oh, uncle, take it easy. He still thought it was a squid. Oh, okay, that's my dad. Okay, so the National Education Association. Now this is evidence that this information I just shared with you has now reached the largest union of American school teachers across the United States. Hawaii State Teachers Association is an affiliate member of that union. And they meet every year, right, at an annual conference. And they pass resolutions. Remember resolutions? Position statements. Well, they passed a resolution that was introduced by the delegates from the Hawaii State Teachers Association. Amazing. It said that the NEA, the National Education Association, will publish an article on the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy, the illegal occupation by the United States in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and the harmful effects that the occupation has had on the Hawaiian people. Wow, they didn't mention colonization, occupation, military. So when the delegates came home, I knew some of them. They asked if I could write it for them. I said, not a problem. This is April 2018. The illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government. Okay, after we just did this talk on terminology, can you spot in the title the point that I'm making? The illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government. What was overthrown? Not the country. That's what this explains. And it also explains how international law applies. It even speaks to war crimes, the Hague and Geneva Conventions. If it was frivolous, do you think the National Education would publish it? But what gave them satisfaction is, I have a PhD in this area. I'm a faculty member at the university. This is what we teach. Then, this article was followed up in October of 2018. The U.S. occupation of the Hawaiian Kingdom, not the colonization of Hawaii. National Education Association published it. That's heavy. And it explains the limitation of U.S. law, pretty much what I was talking about, right? And later that month, the last article was published, the impact of the U.S. occupation on the Hawaiian people. And I specifically addressed the denationalization that took place, the brainwashing. But also, in our country, you had universal health care. Kanaka, Native, Hawaiians of Aboriginal blood, had free health care at no cost. That was covered. Did you know universal health care that everybody talks about today called socialism? We weren't socialists. We took care of our people. And universal health care was passed by the establishment of Queen's Hospital in 1859. We had universal health care in 1880s, 1890s. Did you know when they talk about universal health care in Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, did you know that their universal health care actually started after World War II? Ours was 1859. Wow. And it's not like we're trying to compete against people. What our people had to deal with back then was we were dying. We were dying from measles, from smallpox, our immune system. It was taking out our people, so they took the steps to address it, and they did. But after 1893, we're actually moving into around 1903, the U.S. government, territory says, oh, legislation from the Hawaiian Kingdom legislature slated to give monies to match the funds, private funds of Queen's Hospital for healthcare cannot happen anymore because they called it race-based legislation. That was the first entity to get hit by United States laws, Queen's Hospital. So then they did not provide free healthcare, which they were supposed to Kanaka. That led to where we are now with bad health, when we are not supposed to be there because we are no longer dying from smallpox and measles, we're dying from eating too much mayonnaise. We are dying from being a little momona. Universal healthcare does not only mean you go in to fix your problem, it's also called health education. If they didn't touch Queen's Hospital, I guarantee you we wouldn't be in the situation we are as a health problem. But that is a consequence of imposing American law here. That's what happened. So these articles, when you get a chance, read it. When you want, if I would recommend, go to hawaiiankingdom.org/blog and type in these names, and these things will pop up and it'll take you to go read more. So the issue here is education, yeah, because education is power, right? Because when you get educated, you know how you're going to fight. And you know what I found? And in the military, you naturally got to fight, right? Back then, we got to take on the Soviet Union. You got to have an attitude, because you're not born with an attitude to go fight somebody to the death. You gotta think kind of nuts. I mean, our kupuna, when they fought, that was not normal. They had to, yeah, we're gonna fight, and I gotta deal with the Lapa regiment, you know, kahikili, right? So fighting is in our blood, but it's not normal. You gotta be trained, right? So here, for me, I was trained as an officer to fight, but I used to be on a boxing scholarship at New Mexico Military. So I used to fight light heavyweight, right? So I have that side of me. And you know what I found? When I could fight is when you don't have to fight. Because when you assess a situation, bro, I don't even fight. Bro, you're still calling it a squid. I don't even fight against that. I just got to find out where you got educated. What school you in? Who's your teacher? That's not fighting words. That's just, oh, brother don't know what he's talking about. Because if I really had to fight, I would have fought. But you know, the only thing we're fighting, there's really something we are fighting. That's called ignorance. We're fighting ignorance, but we have an excuse for being ignorant. Brainwashing. See, but you know what? Now we know. And now it is not okay to continue to not know, because now you know. Because once you know, now you got to do. Right? And don't do without knowing. Right? In order to know, ho'okuauhau, genealogy, know what's going on. Know where you're dealing with. If I'm looking at this guy, right? And this is what my trainer said. If I'm gonna fight a fighter against me, and I used to fight low riders, you know, cholos. You guys are heard of cholos, huh? Wow. They wear khaki pants, plaid shirt, button over here with white shirt, undershirt, and bandana, where you can't even see, so they are walking like that. And I used to always be thought I was Mexican. Hey, what do they say? ¿Qué pasó? Brother, no hablo español. I'm Hawaiian. This is not, you know, from boxing. This is Pepe knows being Hawaiian. But what I learned from my trainer, he said, when you go against a guy who fought longer than you, and he has a good record, don't fight the guy's fight, because he's good. You're walking right into it. What he said was, fight your fight. Guess what he taught me? Fight southpaw. You're going left hand now. Throws him off. What we're doing, we're walking right into their fight. What's happening? Ping, 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 ping. Okay, we shake him up. Go again. Ping, 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 ping. Bro, hey, Hawaiian, take it easy. You're walking into the fight, and I can tell you right now, you never study this guy because this guy's telegraphing. Why are you walking into the punch? What I learned is if you're taking a punch, don't fight it, bro. Go with it. Yeah? Let that power go past you, and then counterpunch. But you can't counterpunch without a plan. We've always been operating without a plan. We've been reacting to something when we should be responding to something. See, when you respond, you're now employing your fight. Does that make sense? That is the concept that I'm trying to share with you guys. That it's okay to fight only if you have to. This whole thing, focus on the lease. Tamar Polton talking directly to Lesnar. Oh, now we're getting into war crimes. Now we're getting into destruction of property. But we got to get them to actually see the language, and they're starting to see it. It's really good what's going up here. I got to say, what's happening on the Mauna is getting our people to start asking the right questions. And you know what? You guys are now starting to get the right answers. And you're already starting to see a future just because you know your past. And if you notice, I didn't say anything about the future, right? I just talked about the history. But you guys are already seeing the future because that is Kavama Hoku. Mahalo.